On Wednesday in Stockholm, Sweden, French writer Annie Ernaux delivered her Nobel lecture and spoke of how she hopes that her work, which mixes fiction and memoir, has affected others. Tomorrow, she and this year's other Nobel laureates will formally receive their awards. Jeffrey Brown spoke with her for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Derrière l'image de la jeune mère Lise.
In a new documentary titled The Super 8 Years, we see a young French woman named Annie Ernaux, a wife and mother, a high school teacher in the early 1970s. What we don't see taking place at this time secretly off camera, the book she's working on, her first. The film, based on home movies and produced many years later by Ernaux and her son, captures the early inner struggles of a woman, as she says, tormented by the need to write of her life, to become what she would later call an ethnologist of myself.
J'espérais vraiment pouvoir transmettre.
I truly hoped to transmit an individual personal experience, but in such a way that it would be received by others. It was really that desire that motivated me to write. To be an ethnologist of myself means to speak from my being, from my experience, but looking at it from a great distance, approaching it from the exterior of myself.
Many books later, Ernaux would win literature's biggest prize.
The Nobel Prize in Literature for 2022 is awarded to the French author Annie Ernaux.
Soon after the announcement, Ernaux, now 82 and living outside Paris, came to New York. We spoke at the office of her longtime U.S. publisher, Seven Stories Press, and I asked about mining the past, in a line that begins The Years, one of her best-known books. All the images, she writes, will disappear.
Alors je pense qu'effectivement, en chacun,
I do think that in each of us, images disappear when we die, and perhaps that's what made me write. To think of this moment when all the images I have seen would disappear, this feeling of the loss of things. But I also think that the true reality of the world is forgetting. We forget a great deal from a collective perspective. For instance, we're always surprised when war arises again, as we're seeing now. So it's more a question of forgetting than of memory. And to write is to fight forgetting.
et c'est lutter contre l'oubli que d'écrire.
In some 23 volumes, 16 of them translated and published in English, she's written one woman's story, a woman who is both her and not her. She's been described as genre-defying, her books not quite novels, but not traditional memoirs.
Je ne cherche pas à me définir.
I don't try to define myself in terms of genre. For me, the most important thing is to find the form of the writing that fits with what I'm writing. So to me, the right term is writer.
Pour moi, le terme qui convient, c'est écrivaine.
One constant theme, her working-class roots in Normandy, where her parents ran a grocery, far outside France's traditional literary culture. Her move through education and writing into a more intellectual world, and the distance that created from her family and within herself.
D'une certaine manière, je suis toujours entre les deux.
I remain divided between two worlds. Writing is the place where, with the tools I've acquired, I see the world, but always from the world of my youth, which I could never erase, what the writer Albert Camus called the first man. Well, there's a first woman in me, which means that I will always write from that separate place.
Depuis ce lieu séparé.
Has it been important to you, as a woman, to tell stories that perhaps are less told?
Il est évident que
It's obvious that these stories haven't been told, especially because they haven't been told in the way I wanted them to be told.
pas raconté comme je le voulais.
Without sentimentality, but with finely crafted language and probing honesty, always working from memory, she's written of deeply personal and traumatic experiences. In Happening, first published in 2000, and recently turned into a feature film.
Ça fait mal? Oui. Tout le temps que ça dure.
She looks back to a 1963 pregnancy and abortion, an almost barbaric procedure that nearly killed her, at a time when abortion was still illegal in France. The story, she knows, has a new relevance.
C'est un problème qui, au fond, peut-être.
It's a problem that wasn't ultimately resolved. I think my book, Happening, reveals the savagery of abortion for women when it is banned. But those things are forgotten.
Il y a eu l'oubli de ces choses-là.
Are you surprised that what you experienced so long ago and then wrote about could perhaps be with us again?
Je suis surtout horrifiée.
Above all, I'm horrified and outraged that this could happen again. At the same time, I think that there is something about the power of women to bring children into the world that men wanted to appropriate and once again want to appropriate.
Veulent à nouveau s'approprier.
Sometimes in the books, you seem to be trying to understand what you're writing. At the end of A Woman's Story, you write, "This isn't a biography, neither is it a novel, maybe a cross between literature, sociology, and history."
Les phrases que vous citez dans Une femme, le livre sur ma mère,
The sentences that you quoted from A Woman's Story, the book about my mother, were indeed about trying to situate myself in relationship to what I'd just written. It's work to write, and I want the reader to understand that I'm asking myself questions. For me, to write is to go looking for what I don't even know myself before I write it.
avant de l'écrire.
In her Nobel lecture, Annie Ernaux spoke of her hope that her work can, quote, shatter the loneliness of experiences endured and repressed and enable beings to reimagine themselves. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in New York.
And we celebrate her along with the many others who do. And thank you, Jeffrey. And be